Democracy is ever-changing.
Democracy is about having choices.
Democracy is people power.
Democracy is knowing that your vote matters.
Democracy is empowering.
Good evening, everybody. We are here in Mississauga, Ontario at the Hazel McCallion Central Library to welcome you and this audience for another edition of TVO Today Live. Our subject tonight, will Gen Z or Gen Z reboot democracy? Nearly half the world's population is set to vote this year, and many worry that democracy itself is on the ballot. What do young, engaged citizens think? What will they do with democracy as they start to take center stage? We are truly grateful to be able to do this series on democracy with the generous support of the Wilson Foundation. So thank you, Red Wilson, for your interest in strengthening democracy. No generation is a monolith, but we've got some pretty savvy young people here who can help us get a better sense of what the future might hold. So let us meet them, and here they are in alphabetical order. Cameron Davis co-founded the anti-black racism initiative called Black York Region Youth and was a youth leader at the 2023 Children's General Assembly in Denmark. He is now a student at the University of Ottawa. Sarah Rosick served as a spokesperson for the University of Toronto's Student Encampment for Palestine and is currently a graduate student at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Wyatt Sharp is a 15-year-old journalist and host of The Wyatt Sharp Show on YouTube and the News Forum. He's already interviewed a sitting prime minister and a candidate for U.S. president. Kanira Uthayakumaran is a volunteer with the youth voting advocacy organization New Majority and was part of an effort last year to get Mississauga City Council to update its green development standards. And Bruce Yu was a student trustee for the York Region District School Board and was executive director for the Federation of Canadian Secondary Students. He's an active member of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario and a student at Western University in London. And how about we welcome all of our guests here tonight at the Hazel McCallion Library. Okay, forgive my rudeness for starts. I'm going to turn my back on you for a second just to talk to this audience here. Who thinks Canadian democracy needs a reboot? Hands up. Who thinks it needs a reboot? Okay, I am assuming our director, Sheldon Osmond, is scanning the room right now, and let the record show probably 80 to 90% of the hands have gone up. You all care about this issue, which is why you're here today, so let's go to our panelists and find out more about them. Each of you, in one way or another, have been civically engaged since you were old enough to vote, except for Wyatt, who's still not old enough to vote, but we're glad he's here. There may be an impression among older people out there that yours is a generation of slackers who don't get particularly civically engaged. So I'd like to ask you, Cameron, start us off. How much civic engagement do you see among your peers?
A lot. That's the way you should start it. My story starts in the 10th grade. I was going to school in the York Region District School Board. My teacher told me that racism doesn't exist in Canada, and I had to educate my educator that racism is going on in Canada, and as well as take that further. So I made a video, posted on YouTube, called My Teenage Life Being Black in Canada, and it blew up. I got to speak to news outlets, be in documentaries, share my voice, and that really sparked the change that I wanted to see in the world. It led to me giving my TED Talk last year. It led to me going to Denmark to speak at the September Summit Children's General Assembly. And everywhere I go, I see youth shaping the future. So I think that yes, youth are civically engaged, but it's up to you guys to seek that out.
When you say it blew up on YouTube, how many hits did you get?
60,000.
60,000. Well done. Sarah, what do you see out there in terms of youth engagement?
I think that this generation cares deeply about social justice. I think that we've been able to draw on the interconnected nature of struggles. I think with social media, now we can see live streamed on our phones the worst case of famine in recent human history in Gaza, in Sudan, the worst case of displacement, in the Congo, extraction of minerals, economic and environmental exploitation. And I think that this has pushed this generation to critically examine our positionality. How are we reinforcing or pushing back against these global injustices? And so I do think that this generation cares deeply about social justice. And I also do agree that democracy needs a rebooting.
Wyatt.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo what the other two have said, but I also think that young people are perhaps consuming their news or engaged in politics in different ways than, some of the people who are in the audience or other generations might be. I think that, whether it be housing, the economy, affordability, I mean, these are, certainly issues that are impacting not just all of you, but also my generation and our generation. And so I think young people are definitely engaged because they're looking for proactive discussions on some of these issues, and they're looking for real solutions as to how to deal with them. And so young people are definitely engaged. They're wondering what elected officials are going to do to help, and certainly that's what all of us have been doing as well, is trying to get some answers from some of them on those issues.
Kinera.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that civic engagement is almost sort of a lifestyle for Generation Z as well. We have access to social media at the tip of our fingertips, and through that we've seen more and more youth engage with political ideas and also causes that matter to them. And we're able to speak to these issues very quickly, and we engage and really take a hands-on approach when it comes to advocating for the issues that we care about. Additionally, civic engagement is integrated with our lifestyles through the volunteering requirements that we see in schools. That's kind of a starting point for us, and then from there we branch off to do some amazing things, as echoed by the individuals on this panel. So I think it's very much something that is integral to Gen Z. It's kind of what defines us in a way, and I'm excited to see how we continue to shape that forward.
Bruce.
Yeah, definitely echoing what was just said here earlier today. But I think thinking back to every single campaign I've worked on, every single campaign I volunteered on, there's always young people. And in fact, I think they tend to be the backbone of every campaign. Like I was at NMPP's barbecue earlier today, and all I saw were young people under the age of 25 in blue shirts out there, talking to people, meeting new voters, trying to get the vote out, making sure that we're in the strong place for the next election. So I think absolutely 100% young people are out there, they're engaged, they want to be engaged, and they're going to be, I think, a force to be reckoned with on any campaign, and certainly in government in a couple of years.
Here's where the baby boomer host pushes back and says, I'm sure all of you are very deeply engaged, and I've read up all about you, and you are doing amazing things. But others of your generation that I talk to are apathetic, they don't vote, they may care about issues, but I'm not sure they ever get off the couch to do anything about it. I'm being a little provocative here just to get you going. Tell me why I'm wrong, and why I should actually see a lot more activism happening than I think.
I think it's primarily because people kind of expect, the status quo to be how young people engage in politics, when in reality it might be people are, instead of, turning on the cable news and getting their news that way, or getting their information via that way, they might be getting it from, say, social media, for example, or they might be following different content creators who are providing solutions to some of these issues. And so, while they might not be making the connection between how to actually deal with these issues, they are certainly aware that there are a lot of things that are impacting them, and perhaps where we can do better on is actually showing them how to be kind of a voice for change and how to actually advocate for themselves on some of these issues that are impacting them.
Sarah, we have data which shows that your age cohort votes disproportionately, significantly less than other age cohorts. How can you tell me you're all engaged on issues if you don't even vote?
I think that refusal to vote can be a deeply political statement as well. If the system presents options that are morally unacceptable to one, well then not voting or refusal, may be what they decide to do. I do think that balancing that refusal with other forms of engagement, like direct actions or organizing at the grassroots level, is important. But at the end of the day, if somebody feels as if they have to pick between the lesser of two evils, if candidates don't align with them morally, well then refusal is also valid. For example, if you're a Wet'suwet'en land defender living in Canada, it doesn't matter if you vote Liberal or Conservative. It doesn't matter, because the pipeline projects will still be supported. If you're a Palestinian Canadian, it doesn't matter who you vote for. You know that arms will continue to be sent to Israel. You know that your land will still be, will continue to be destroyed.
Well, I should just jump in, and I don't want to get off on the path here, but the Foreign Minister of Canada just pulled permits on those. Okay, you saw that story. In terms of arms going to Israel.
Well, yes, people have been on the streets.
So there is a difference.
Well, people have been on the streets for months on end, and they were being met with silence, even at the institutional level. Students have been pushing for admin to listen to them, and obviously we were ignored, and we had to establish encampments for admin to even approach the negotiating table, and that is at the institutional university level. When it comes to the state, I mean, the burden is almost on the people to be heard. Traditional forms of engagement have failed the people, and there is mistrust there, and I think that refusal is tied to that.
Let's see what Bruce says about that, because Bruce, you have decided to get somewhat actively involved in partisan politics. You're Are you a member of the Progressive Conservative Party?
I am, yes. A
You are-
little after my 14th birthday, as soon as I could join. And I
Okay.
think I want to actually make me speak a little bit on that. Like, yes, you have to be 18 to vote in Canada, I think in most countries around the world, but you can start getting involved. I think I joined my first campaign when I was maybe 13, give or take. There's absolutely ways to get involved as a volunteer, but even you can be a member of a party at 14, and you can actually vote in a nomination election at the age of 14.
What got you in?
What got me in? It's a good question. I've been asked that a lot. I actually don't have an answer to that, but if I had to speculate, it's probably just following the news, looking at what's going on, and saying, hey, I want to be a part of this. Like, hey, there's an opportunity for me to get involved, even so young.
Cameron, for those who say there's a lot more apathy out there than this august group of panelists would suggest, what do you say?
I'll tell you the story of how I ended up in Berlin, Denmark. It took 20 kids. It first started from 240 kids, all applicants from around the world. They take 20 kids from 20 different countries. They each get flown out into Berlin, Denmark, and they give speeches on issues that are important to them. So what I did was a speech on the digital divide, talking about how there's an inequitable amount of resource allocation in Western countries versus in the African or Eastern countries. And my team, it was from South Africa. We had people from all different continents around the world, and we were able to speak about this issue and write a code-drafted manifesto to the United Nations. So that's just one group of people. In Markham, I joined the Markham Black Youth Liaison Committee. Me and several other black youth in that area were able to create events for Markham. We're able to collaborate with the mayor of Markham. We're able to make change. I know that Generation Z is capable of making change, and I've seen it wherever I've been. I've seen it in media. I've seen it in my collaborations with colleagues. I've seen it in school with their activism. And I feel like I understand that Generation Z may have the ability to make that change and be able to have that voice, but it's about finding it and catering to their needs so that they can speak on it when they're ready.
Kinira, what about voting? Why is it that young people disproportionately vote so much less than other groups?
I think when it comes to civic engagement, voting is not the only way to go about doing so. We see, for sure, very low youth voter turnout numbers within recent by-elections or even at the federal level, and those numbers do seem to be decreasing over the years. But when you ask Gen Z how many of us have signed a petition in the past couple years, how many of us have reshared a post that we cared about or advocated for a social cause through volunteering or other means, more of us will be able to say confidently that we have engaged with the issues that matter to us. So we see civic engagement not simply as using our vote, but through any action that we take in order to better the communities around us. And I think changing that definition a little bit is what defines us.
Okay, get comfortable for a second because I'm going to set up this next question with some numbers here. About a year ago, there's a group called Open Society Foundations, and they did a survey in 30 different countries. Maybe you heard about this. It did not include Canada, but it did include many Western democracies. And it found just 57% of 18 to 35-year-olds thought that democracy is preferable to any other form of government. 42% were open to military rule. TVO asked Ontarians a similar question, and I'm happy to say 82% of young adults 18 to 24 in that survey said democracy is more important than ever. It was a lower percentage, frankly, than older voters, but 82 is a pretty good number. Question. Go ahead. Wyatt, tell me, is your generation adequately invested in democracy?
I mean, I think so, even if they aren't necessarily able to kind of articulate why that is. I mean, I think just talking to some of my peers who I go to school with, for example, they very much like the idea of being able to talk about issues, being able to have their own stances on issues, and being able to advocate for some of, what they would like to see done. And, some people were talking about, for example, on our panel about how that might happen, whether it be posting on social media or whether it be, signing a petition as another example. But I also think that just, maybe it's talking amongst your peer groups about some of these issues and just really trying to drive home change in that way as well. And that kind of just sums up what democracy is and I think why we need to preserve democracy. And I think Gen Z understands that perhaps more than some other generations of people. If you look to the United States right now, I'm someone who talks about American politics rather frequently. And I think what we're seeing in that example is kind of a disregard to democracy and the actual democratic process as a whole. And I think Gen Z is really passionate again about kind of trying to preserve it in the best way possible.
Sarah, I know you said earlier you thought democracy needed a reboot, but having said that, do you believe that you and your age cohort are committed to making democracy better?
I think that folks definitely want to feel and feel represented when it comes to like elected officials or decision makers, key decision makers. At the same time, to me, democracy has to do with building power and reimagining societies and structures. And we want these structures to serve us best. When we look at movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, it wasn't an educational space. It wasn't just about education and teaching people about the importance of addressing structural and systemic inequity. It was about reimagining how systems can better serve people, redistributing money away from policing and toward, mental health related or, educational, like different spaces in society that will serve people better. And so I think that people are reimagining, how societal structures can be better for most folks. And I definitely see, that as a pathway to lead for.
Cameron,
more
I should
justice.
ask you, when you started your organization, did you feel that democracy enabled you to do that?
I think that with Generation Z, we're all eager to get involved. The reason why we co-founded that organization was because we didn't see it happening. We didn't see ourselves represented in our community, and we wanted to make that change. So I feel like Generation Z is equipped to make that change on their own and is eager to get into a position where they're able to do it by any means necessary. So I applaud that, and I think it's really important that people understand that that's a possibility.
Bruce, when you got involved in partisan politics at a younger age than you were, whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 years ago, what did you imagine that you were contributing to democracy by getting involved?
It's a good question. Save the tough one for last, eh? When I think about politics in general, I think democracy is so integral to it. And what this makes me think about is during my time as a student trustee, one of the first things that came across, I guess, my table or virtual table as it was at that time, was an attempt by a school to institute a lottery for student council elections. So as opposed to it being a democratic election process like you see in most schools, it was a lottery. And the amount of pushback I saw from students was absolutely incredible. And what that tells me is that students are 100% committed to democracy, and they're committed to it maybe absolutely at the federal, provincial, municipal level, but even at the school level, they absolutely want to make sure democracy is there. And I know students that fought for democracy at the school level are going to continue to fight for that at every other level of government. That's absolutely encouraging to me as a young person involved in politics.
Kinnear, what did you think you could contribute by getting engaged?
So the engagements that I were involved in were more on a local level. So we were trying to implement green development standards at the Mississauga City Council level, and we ended up performing deputations to City Council twice in order to make those motions happen. So for me, it was more of a local motivation in order to see. I saw all of the infrastructure being developed around Mississauga. I saw the number of cranes in the sky, and I knew that if these future developments were not being met to accordable, environmental and social standards, it would cause a very big deficit for our future infrastructure and cause costly retrofits down the line. So that personal need of seeing it within my own community stemmed this engagement. And then following that, I ended up getting involved with more engagements of trying to increase the youth voter turnout within Mississauga and other regions of the city, and also within Ontario as a whole. So I think it starts off from something local, of seeing it within your local community and banding together, seeing the number of youth that were also involved. I mean, we packed City Council with a bunch of Gen Z members dressed up in green just to try and advocate for these green development standards. So seeing that engagement really just drives this motivation forward, and it kind of acts like a water wheel of sorts. We see youth getting involved, and it just keeps the motivation going.
How did that go? Well, like when you showed up at council with a whole bunch of young kids dressed up in green, what kind of reaction did you get?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that they say is we don't see this every day, and they obviously applauded us for getting youth involved with it. And they did also express similar sentiments of, usually we hear that Generation Z is very apathetic to these causes, so seeing this is a very big surprise. And I like the fact that we were able to surprise them in that manner. And I think that just added to the cause of our engagement. And as of April, they were able to implement green development standards, and then shortly after, Caledon also adopted the policy as well. So the fact that Generation Z was able to bring those changes forward and really surprise council, show them that we do care and we care about our communities as well, is just really fulfilling as well.
Let me do one more follow-up with you on that, because when you show up to City Council chambers, it's big and it can be a little bit intimidating, and if you want to make a presentation, you got to go to a microphone, speak in front of a lot of people. Did you feel it was a welcoming environment for you to make your point?
Yeah, Mississauga City Council is very nice in the sense as you're going up the stairs, you see the big constellation of, they painted all of the ceilings and stuff, so it was a very big shock, but the size of it and also how professional the setting was really something to take in as you were going up the stairs. But then also looking behind me and seeing the sea of Generation Z that was with me, it's very much a movement that is involved in community engagement, where none of us are doing this alone. You know, we see a whole panel of students that are civically engaged. It's not just one of us that are expressing these sentiments. So seeing that And being comfortable within that setting of civic engagement just helped make it a more comfortable environment to work in. And I see more Generation Z being comfortable with speaking to MPs, speaking to politicians, and I think that's just going to continue.
Let me follow up on that with everybody else here. The plumbing of democracy, right? Elections, legislatures, political parties, all of that kind of stuff. How interested is your generation in all of that? Sarah?
I think that people are looking beyond the local politic. I think that people want to see themselves represented again when it comes to elected officials, when it comes to key decision makers, but there is that gap there. I think that engaging with elected officials is not, the easiest, especially if your stance doesn't align with the status quo, doesn't align with, dominant discourse. And so I think that people are deeply engaged and interested in social justice and in democracy and in the government, but it's difficult to get to be heard sometimes, which then creates that mistrust that may push people away as well.
Wyatt, how about it? The plumbing of democracy? Is your generation interested in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what I was saying before, too, I think, and as she was saying, I mean, I think a lot of what's happening here is that people are more interested in the issues, and that's often why we don't see people turning out to vote, because they do feel so apathetic towards some of the kind of lack of action on some of these issues. But that doesn't mean that they aren't concerned about the issues that are kind of, kitchen table issues and impacting people on a day-to-day basis. And so kind of just, again, following up on that, like, I think we need to encourage people to mobilize from where their concerns are. So if, say, someone is concerned about the economy or the environment, understanding who they can reach out to, who they can talk to really try and drive home some change and some solutions on some of those issues.
Okay, let's try that. You're 15, right? So you're the youngest one here. Somebody's 24 here, right? Sarah, you're 24. So we have an age gap there of almost a decade. Your generation, whether we call it Z or Z, has seen a lot. And if we look at, you're all theoretically born between the years of 1997 and 2012, and here's what's happened in your short lives already. Major social movements such as Black Lives Matter, a worldwide, once-in-a-century global pandemic, Donald Trump, the January 6th insurrection, a convoy in Ottawa, wildfires, storms, climate emergencies, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time, and with frequency that we haven't seen in a long time. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, October 7th, and the resulting war in Gaza. Massive technological shifts. Anyway, we could go on here. My question, Cameron, why don't you come in first on this? Do you think the tumultuous times in which you have grown up have made your generation more engaged than they might otherwise have been in quieter times?
That's a great question. I think that, yes, we are more engaged now because of how we've been raised. Growing up with technology, being immersed by it, it's become second nature to us, and it's allowed us to become educated on what's happening around the world, in our own country, in our own homes, but as well as learn and become educated on these issues. And because we can get educated on these issues, we feel capable to speak about them, capable to use our voice. So I think that at the same time, although that we got this privilege to be raised in times that were controversial, which inspired us to get educated, it's also that it's just a shift in us. I think that despite whether we had this upbringing or not, we'd still be willing to talk, willing to use our voice, but it's just that there's more time, more opportunity to speak about it now because we had these experiences.
Kinnear, how about it? The tumultuous times contribute to your activism?
Yeah, what a time to be alive. I think our development as we were growing up, most of us were born or were elementary school students right after the recession. And then 2012 was when iPhones ended up being 50% of individuals ended up owning an iPhone or some smartphone of some device. So we were able to see just rapid change all throughout our lives, and we're very used to it. If anything, we're more used to having rapid change and changes happen all the time than we are to stagnation. When we see things remain the same for a while, I think we are more motivated to change it as well. And I think that's just kind of driven us to get more involved and see change, and we get restless when we see things not happening.
Bruce?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to it if I think about it. One is the awareness. It's the fact that the news, current affairs, it's everywhere you see, right? If you turn on your phone, it's in Apple News. If you go onto TikTok, you're right, a lot of it's not just music videos, it's news. It's people trying to get other people more engaged. So definitely a lot more awareness to where what's going on. At the same time, that's paired with an influx of tools, right? There are letter writing campaign tools out there. There are links in social media bios where you can click on a button, send a message directly to your MP. The combination of both being aware and having those tools makes it so much easier to get engaged, and we're absolutely seeing that on a wide variety of issues from across the political spectrum.
Sarah, let me come at the question a different way from you. The big issue in your life in the last year almost is the war in the Middle East. Canada is not what you would call a big player when it comes to that issue internationally. There are other countries that are far more significant in all of what's going on over there. And I wonder whether that has made you feel more powerless about your ability to affect events.
Yeah, the ongoing genocide in Gaza. When we look at the way that Canada has contributed, I mean, it has been really vast, from our institutions to the state as a whole, from arms being sent to the United States, being a country that Canada follows in terms of like foreign policy, in terms of stances that government officials make, including the Prime Minister. I think that Canadians care deeply about the nation's stance on this issue, and I think more than that, like Palestinian voices, it's hard to find them. They don't exist within the government. I think that social media has helped bring forward voices that would be otherwise ignored. I think that bodies that have been dehumanized in the past, now through social media, they have a platform. This generation is able to humanize them and to connect with them. I think that, again, with social media, having such close access to suffering and pain has helped mobilize this generation to show up and to stand up against injustice around the world for all.
Let me pick up on that with Wyatt. Do you think social media has made your generation more interested in democracy and politics, or less? The argument could be made that if you can just sit back on your couch on social media and push like, you're not really involved. You may be a little more aware, but you're not really involved. What do you think?
I would say that's certainly how it started, but I think recently with a lot of elected officials, even if you look right now at the presidential race, both of the two presidential nominees have found themselves on social media, TikTok as just one example, because they realize that's where Generation Z or Z is. They're trying to meet voters where they are. And so, recently, again, I think with these candidates actually taking to social media to talk about some of these policy issues that are specifically affecting Gen Z, because they understand that perhaps older generations aren't as active on a platform like TikTok. They're really reserving those types of spaces for young people and for kind of providing an alternative and a platform to deal with some of the challenges.
I want to hear the guys on the ends, because you're active in partisan politics and you're active in a different way, not necessarily in partisan politics. In my generation, we often look at things as to whether or not it's left-wing or right-wing or centrist or whatever. Is that the way your generation looks at challenges that need to be dealt with?
I can't speak for my entire generation, but the way that I see it is everything is intertwined now. And as we're progressing, there's no black and white. It's not as restrictive as it used to be. Everything is more convoluted, and we have to make our solutions malleable and versatile so that they're accommodating to those solutions. There's not one right answer. There's no one size fits all. We have to be accommodating. We have to be inclusive. We have to be equitable when we're making our solutions and when we're deciding what type of institution we want to uphold.
Bruce, because you are self-identifying as a member of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, do you tend to see the world in terms of conservatives versus progressives, et cetera?
Maybe personally, when I think or listen to someone speak on TV, certainly in my mind, I'm definitely maybe categorizing them as progressive or conservative. But I think broadly speaking, looking at the federal landscape right now, I think those lines have absolutely become very blurred. Take the instance of Pierre Poilievre. I was very proud to be part of his leadership campaign, and what I'm seeing overwhelmingly is that a lot of Canadians from across the political spectrum are rallying behind his message, right? Expressing their concerns with the carbon tax, and I think the carbon tax connects directly to affordability. And affordability is not necessarily a left-wing or right-wing issue, right? I think it's any good political party needs to address that issue, and the fact that the Conservative leaders are addressing that effectively and being able to connect with so many different Canadians across the political spectrum, I think speaks to the fact that maybe some of those lines are blurred, and some traditionally quote-unquote progressive voters who care about affordability, because I think it's also a progressive value, are going to be actually considering voting for someone they might not have considered voting for in the past.
Kanir, what do you see on that?
Yeah, I would agree that we are definitely, from a political standpoint, some of us have grown to be a little bit disillusioned with the idea of democracy in some cases, where we haven't seen it benefiting us with the specific causes that we care about. For most cases, a lot of us are taking the charge on initiatives. We go out of our way to start these initiatives, and we kind of see governments or institutions as a red a red stamp at the end of it to sign off on the charges or the changes that we want to see, and kind of an endpoint. I think we take a very do-it-ourselves approach when it comes to enacting civil engagement and changes, and I think slowly we're starting to rebuild that trust in these institutions as time goes by.
Wyatt, I think people in the older generations are very polarized about politics these days, right? Some people are very far left, some people are very far right. Probably most of the people are in the middle. You tend not to know that if you watch American cable television. It seems very, very extreme. Where do you think your generation is on these extremes?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because Gen Z is very much more interested in just their stances on like individual policy issues. So for example, we've been talking about the war in Gaza. You know, a lot of Gen Z is very much supportive and empathetic to what's happening to the people of Gaza, but they also might be supportive of, say, someone like Pierre Poilievre and the federal conservatives, which is very interesting because usually you don't see a combination of those two sorts. Usually right now, a lot of the people who are supportive of Gaza would fall more so on the left wing of the political spectrum, so on and so forth. And so I think that kind of speaks to the fact that, you know, young people are very much willing to just take kind of individualistic stances on some of the issues that are impacting them.
Gotcha. Okay, let's just re-rack and let everybody know that we are here in Mississauga at the Hazel McCallion Central Library, and we're talking about the future of democracy with members of Generation Z, as it's popularly known, but Z, as I guess we sometimes call it in Canada. Our guests are University of Ottawa student Cameron Davis, Sarah Rasic, who was a spokesperson for the U of T Student Encampment for Palestine, the News Forum journalist and the next host of The Agenda, Wyatt Sharp. Wyatt?
Maybe.
Kinira Uthayakumaran of the New Majority, and Bruce Yu, who's a student at Western University. Now, guys, sit tight for a second here, because I want to. David, would you stand for a second? Many people in this audience will recognize Dave Meslin. Dave, I'm going to twist you this way so this camera can pick you up here. Dave has just finished hosting and producing a wonderful 6-part series on democracy that we are going to show on TVO. It is called Unrigged. It is on Sunday nights, 8 p.m. on television, for those of us who still like to watch television, and it is all over YouTube.
What channel?
Well, Cable 2, where I came from, Channel 19 if you're over the antenna. YouTube also has all the programs, and all 6, I think, are ready to go right now.
Yeah.
Hold the mic nice and close and tell us what you think of what you're hearing so far.
Well, this is a reminder for me of how important our youth are and how talented our youth are. And I think this is a great example of why we should consider lowering the voting age in Canada to 16. Because Wyatt, you should be a voter, in my opinion. Anyone agree with that?
Now, he's 15. Is he allowed to vote at 15?
He should be, absolutely.
Few months.
Sure, I would make it sure. Let's. But we talked about rebooting the system, or rebooting democracy.
Yeah.
And Sarah used the phrase reimagining societal structures. Let's talk about one of the most important systems we have, which is our voting system. We're using first past the post in Canada. We've had so many attempts to change it. We had a referendum in Ontario, 3 referendums in BC, and of course, famously, Justin Trudeau promised that he would change the voting system. I'm hoping that your generation can figure out how to do it. First past the post feeds negativity, pushes out new voices, and distorts the results. And our generation has failed in giving Canada a voting system that we deserve, and we're counting on you guys to figure it out. So over to you.
Let me do before we get back to them, I want to do a follow-up with you. This is my iPhone. I don't think I have the most up-to-date version, but I gather they're on version 16 right now.
That's right.
What version of democracy are we on in Canada right now?
In the TV show Unrigged, which you can watch on TVO starting tonight at 8 o'clock, we pointed out that we upgrade the operating system on our phone every few months, but we haven't upgraded the operating system of our democracy in over 150 years. And I think that's a shame. And we're one of the only countries in the world still using first past the post, and it's something we should be embarrassed about and something we should be really, really eager to change.
And for those who say we are a successful Western nation in part because we have a first past the post system that allows the creation of majority governments and creates a stability that we kind of sometimes like, what do you say?
I would say that there are easily quantifiable metrics that prove that our system is failing. One is voter turnout. Number two is the lack of representation of women and visible minorities in Parliament. And number three is the behavior of our politicians during question period. First past the post feeds that type of negative toxicity. And when we watch 338 members of Parliament yell at each other, laugh at each other, we should all be absolutely embarrassed and wondering if the system design is feeding that type of behavior and if there's better alternatives out there.
Dave points out in the show that if we behaved in our workplaces the way politicians behave in the provincial legislature, in the federal parliament,
We'd be fired.
we'd be fired. There we go. Dave, the show is Unrigged, 6 parts on TVO. I want to thank you for coming today, and good luck with the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Meslin. "80 to 90% of the hands went up when I asked people off the top, does our democracy need a reboot? Sounds like most people think we need a new iteration of whatever we're involved in right now. So, if we need to reboot our politics, what does that mean? What does a rebooted Canadian democracy look like?" Sarah, start us off.
Right. So election season always feels as if it's a competition between two major parties, and if you don't align with, either or, well, then refusal, like I mentioned earlier, becomes, I think, a legitimate and genuine form of protest. You should only vote for a party that you're aligned with morally. In terms of rebooting democracy, that's a really big question. I would hope that this generation can push for a democracy, for a government that refuses to support human rights violations around the world. I would hope that in this country it would be a democracy where uninvited settlers like myself can position ourselves and recognize and critically think about how our positionality is either reinforcing or pushing back against the dominance of Indigenous peoples on this land by the Canadian state. I would hope that we can live in a society, in a democratic society, in which people feel represented and have their issues on the agenda without having to establish encampments or without having to take the streets week after week for their elected officials to give them, space and time to be heard.
But I'm talking about the system of how we do democracy. What needs to change about the kind of plumbing of how we do this?
Yeah, I mean, as Dave was talking about, I think it largely comes down to the fact that our political system right now is grounded in party politics. So, for example, MPs or MPPs feel as if they have to make a decision. You've even seen examples where members of certain political parties have been kicked out of their caucus simply because they were, wanting to speak their mind and deviate from perhaps what their party leader was talking about. And I think young people in particular and Gen Z just find that idea very strange that people are elected, but in many cases are not able to speak their mind. And so I think that's certainly one thing that needs to change. And then as Dave again was talking about, maybe it is making a switch away from something like first past the post that we've been using for 150 years and has just gotten us kind of do-overs of previous what many people would deem as failed, administrations that really haven't been able to enact kind of positive change on any of these issues because, the cost of living and what have you, these are issues that have been impacting people for decades now and really it doesn't seem as if a lot of change is happening and I think Gen Z is getting, very apathetic and very tired of that.
Cameron, what would you like to see in terms of rebooting our democratic system?
So I'll start by saying that I'm for refinement of democracy. I feel like democracy we have now is already shattered, so we're trying to lift it back up. And before I talk about that, I want to tell you my thought process behind it. So there's an artist named Naoko Fukumaru, and they have a process called kintsugi. And this is basically when a vase or a pot breaks, you rebuild it with gold welding. So the cracks are still there, but you're re-welding the cracks with gold. And I think that's what we need for our system. That's what we need for our institutions. It's taking accountability for our actions, taking accountability for the oppression, discrimination of all groups, and then working together to fix it. And I think that Generation Z is one that is taking accountability for the wrongdoings of our past. We're cognizant of what happened in our past, and we're ready to build a better future.
What does it look like, Kinera?
Yeah, I think I'd like to take the stance of increasing voter turnout. For sure, we see the numbers are low within youth, and there's a reason because the governments and current institutions and the way that votes are working are just not meeting young people where they're at. I think that voter turnout is a reflection of the health of a democracy, right? We need to see and make sure that democracies actually represent the majority of voices there. If we're seeing numbers in the 20%, 30% if we're lucky in local elections, at the federal election as well, when we're seeing very low turnouts from our generation and more of it coming from older generations as well, we really need to make sure that all of these generations are being heard and that the system is able to meet us with MPs engaging with Gen Z, engaging with millennials as well.
Bruce, I think in the last Ontario election, which was 2022, what was turnout? 43%, something like that? 43%. It's the worst of my lifetime. Tell me something we could do to get more people out to vote.
I think when we talk a little bit about rebooting democracy, the first thing that comes to mind is a question I've been asked a lot, and that is, why are you conservative? And my answer to that is always, I don't believe in fixing something that's not broken. And I think what I first want to highlight is that we have an incredibly strong belief in our democratic system. Like, if you go to vote, you know your vote is going to count, right? Our election results come out very fast. Even if they didn't, we know they're legitimate. Certainly drawing a contrast with the United States, where things are certainly a lot more hectic than they are here. And I'm very grateful for that as a Canadian, as an Ontarian. And what I'd say to the results of last election is that, this is the party that got the most votes as a percentage going back, the most votes of a winning party going back to 2007. So I think democracy is still very strong. The fact that you go to a ballot and you know that your vote is counting and you know that elected representatives are being elected democratically, legitimately, I think speaks a lot to the power of our democracy right now.
Okay, but I want to hear some more ideas here. Sarah, if we want more young people, we want more everybody voting, but we particularly want more young people voting, since you hear it all the time. You're our future. You're going to solve all the problems we've created. So if you're going to do that, how do we get more young people out to vote?
I think it's as simple as, if people thought that voting would help improve their material conditions, they would vote, they would show up. If they really thought that their lived reality could be improved based on a vote, well, I think that they would. I think it really does come down to them feeling as if, well, number one, mistrust, not trusting in the system, not trusting that it will actually work in the benefit for all people. But in addition to that, also feeling as if you're limited, like your options are limited. It's either liberal or conservative, and those are your two options. And if you don't align with either or, well then, there's no point in voting. And so I think rebuilding trust, and again, pushing for change in ways beyond voting as well. Like, we see grassroots movements achieve huge victories. We see, again, coming back to the Black Lives Matter movement as well, pushing for money to be redistributed from punitive policing to grassroots organizations that promote things like mental health care and other things like, the safety of the community. We see that happen. That happened in LA. LA redistributed some money. And so I think it comes down to trust and people really believing in what they're participating in, whether it's voting or.
Wyatt, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I would just say, you kind of sparked something in my head when you said liberal and conservative, and I think whether it be in Canada or the United States, there's this idea of kind of a binary choice. And I remember back when I first got involved in politics, it was over the course of a student vote program that was organized by an organization called Civics that happens in schools all across the country. And it was actually one of my peers who thought, well, this democratic system that we're using is, been doing the job to a semi-effective degree for the past little while, but he brought up the idea of splitting the vote, and he was talking about how, I feel as if when I'm casting my vote, I can't actually represent myself, because if I vote for, say, the NDP or the Green Party, the party in which he wanted to vote for, that gives, say, the Conservatives a greater chance at actually being victorious. And that goes back to kind of what Dave was saying about actually wanting to change the way in which we do democracy and the way in which we're able to kind of represent ourselves. That's
a systemic comment, though. That is a comment that strikes at the heart of how we vote and the system by which we vote. Kinera, do you think is it possible to do anything about that system, which, if we changed it, might bring more people forward? What do you think?
Yeah, I think during campaigns, we need to see more elected officials speaking about the issues that actually matter to Canadians. And sometimes we hear blanket statements being made across the board, or the issues that we truly care about. For Gen Z, for example, climate change, mental health. We are not hearing these spoken about at rallies, at different events like that. And we really need to rebuild the trust that when we are casting our vote, we're actually having our values reflected when we cast that vote, and it goes into that. I think with us in particular, we tend to vote more for policies and less personalities. It's less of a black or white issue for us. We're caring about very specific issues. We care about seeing that change directly happen, and less about this general idea of like a whole party or a whole other party.
I want to ask about online voting. And I should start by saying there is something kind of cool about having to go out to a voting station, to a place, take an actual paper ballot, take a pencil, put an X on that piece of paper in a private booth, put it in a box. We've been doing that way for a very long time, and there's something kind of special and traditional about that. However, Mr. Meslin, among others, is saying it's now time for online voting. Sorry, I'm going to put my back to you one more time. Mr. Director, can I get a wide shot of the room? How many people think it's time that we voted online, or at least had the option of voting online? Hands up, please. Hands down. How many people like it the way it is? You should have to show up at a polling station. Online, no. Okay, look to me about 3/4 versus 1/4. Does that feel about right? 3/4 of the people wanting the option to vote online? Okay, I have a feeling I know how you folks are going to go because you live on your phones, right? Cameron, what do you think? Should online be an option?
100%. I think it should be because you're looking at it from an equitable standpoint. If people can't make it to the place that they're casting the ballots, their vote is going to go unnoticed. If people can go online, if it's an option that's justifiable, you can still go to the polling station if you'd like to, but not everyone has to. It's understanding that there's a difference between like one size fits all versus everyone can do what they want to do and the result still is the same. So I think being cognizant of like people's circumstances, people's beliefs, all that's really important. And if someone wants to do something differently, which ends up influencing the same result in the end, I see no problem with it.
Okay, I'm going to get the rest of you on this, but let me give the heads up to this audience. We have a microphone over here. As soon as we finish this round of questioning, we'll open it up for your questions. So if you want to start lining up, now is a good time. Okay, Bruce, you give me your take on this, whether online should be an option.
For me, it's a very, very strong no. I think one of the most important things about an election is legitimacy behind it, and I think having online voting absolutely calls into question the legitimacy of a vote, whether that's a younger person logging into their grandparent or the parent's account, casting a ballot on their behalf, or vulnerabilities to hacking, anything like that. So for me, the best way, the most democratic way to vote is to go into that polling station, and employers absolutely have an obligation to ensure that there's time for an employee to go out and vote.
I'm not taking a position on this by asking this follow-up question, but do you do your banking online?
I do.
Do you trust the bank to get it right?
Sometimes.
Only sometimes?
Only sometimes. I do go into the branch ever so often.
You do? Because you are concerned about the security of your deposits.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, actually. I was depositing a check yesterday, which I think might be rare among young people, and sometimes I'm worried that a check online is going to be flagged as fraudulent or it's going to be delayed. So I will very often go into the bank and deposit a physical check at a teller, simply because I think the bank believes that that is more legitimate. It's more likely to get cleared earlier.
In 3 years, Wyatt, when you can vote, do you want the option of being able to vote on your smartphone?
I mean, I think for me personally, like it would be very convenient, and you bring up the example of banking. But I do certainly take what Bruce is saying, and the fact that there are some perhaps integrity issues there, like anything. It could be hacked. There could be some problems that arise from it. But I think our society very much is now an online society, and we need to start investing in other ways to actually help people cast a vote. Me personally, I mean, I think it would be very convenient. I think for a lot of my peers, for example, specifically when maybe they're in university and they have so much going on, whether it be assignments that they're doing, maybe they have part-time jobs on the side. Not only do they not have time, but they just don't have a strong interest in perhaps, getting a ride or driving over to their local voting booth to actually cast a ballot. And if they had the option to do that online, it would kind of, I think, incentivize a new segment of the younger voting bloc to actually get out there and make their voices heard, which, as we've noted several times, is not something that has been happening with the lowest voter turnout in the last election. And I think we need to do everything we can to try and change that, and that's certainly one solution.
Well, Kinnear, let me take it the next step. Never mind only voting online. How about referendums online? How about making policy online? How about you come home from school or work every day and there are 1 or 2 or 3 questions waiting for you that you have to vote on to determine whether or not we're going to spend the money on this aspect of healthcare or that aspect of education? How about government online? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say we definitely need to get past the voting part first. It's a question of accessibility, echoing the same thing that Cameron said. We need to make it more accessible for participants and members of civic society to actually engage with it. Is it really a democracy if we're denying that entire choice for individuals who are not able to make it out to the polls or are not able to make it to city council to hear on these referendums or on these policies as well? So while I think for myself it would be a positive step in the right direction, maybe very down the line once we have more trust and faith within security systems and cybersecurity as a whole. But at the present moment, maybe we still have a couple steps to get there.
Sarah, last word to you. Not just voting online, direct democracy as well. What do you think?
I absolutely think that it's an issue of, or a question rather, of accessibility, whether it's about somebody being able or unable to go down to a polling station physically, or them having the luxury of the time and the money to make that trip down and to vote. I think that it would engage more people and that it would, again, be more accessible and convenient for many if we had the option to vote online. So I'm definitely in favor.
Okay. Not only do we have a long line of questioners here, but I have to say, I love the way you folks ran for the microphone. We don't often see that. Sometimes it's, you're a Canadian audience, it's like pulling teeth to get people to be the first ones to ask a question. But sir, if you wouldn't mind, give us your first name, give us where you're from, and tell us who your question's for.
Sure. First and foremost, I'm so proud of all of you. It's tremendous work to see you and to hear about you. I'm Chirag Variao. I'm a professor and the director of first-year engineering at the University of Toronto. Last week, we introduced about 1,500 students as part of our first-year class. And as we did that, there was a thought at the back of my mind that kept coming back every so often. And that is, do you think that millennials or baby boomers have let you down? And more specifically, what can we do to help you find your way moving forward?
Go ahead, Cameron, you got the mic up. Go.
No, I don't think that we've 100% been let down. You can't generalize based off the whole generation. My parents, my grandparents, their friends, they've all supported me in my voice. So to answer the second part of the question, encourage Generation Z to use their voice when they can and facilitate the discussion with them when they have questions, when they have concerns, when you're at the dinner table and having a conversation about policy or anything. Have an open mind and be willing to engage your perspective, hear them out, and go forward. If you're shutting them down at every point, they're not going to be receptive to you in the future. They're going to feel that you let them down. But if you are willing to learn and willing to grow, I think that's all you guys can do as of the previous generation.
Bruce.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm really happy to maybe answer it within the context of post-secondary education. I think it's absolutely integral that universities and colleges are bastions of free speech. I think it's absolutely integral that they are allowing for the open discussion, that they're not endorsing or opposing any particular viewpoint. I think that's actually probably the most important thing someone at a university could do to ensure that that dialogue is flowing and that students feel comfortable having that discussion.
Sarah.
I think that there's a rich history of organizing and activism and movement work, that has existed for years and years and generations. I will say, though, that, I think that a lot of the things in our society that have gone by unquestioned are finally being questioned. I think that people have been able to build power now, and we are continuing to build power and do so in a way that is productive. But I don't think it's about individuals. I think it's about the system and systemic inequity and failures that have set certain people up to fail and certain people up to succeed. And I think that questioning that as a collective is important, but it's not on individual people when it comes to placing the blame.
Great. Thank you for the question. Next, please.
Hi, this is Aleem. I am from the city of Mississauga. I just wanted to say that thank you very much for this great presentation. You all had very great points, so it was very nice listening to all of you. I did have a couple questions, and I'll just break it down. We all know that with Bill C-18, which is the Online News Act bill that has been passed, where we can't share news content on Facebook. And I think this is a big hinder towards democracy and getting those great ideas out, because I know a lot of young people do use Facebook to get their news, apparently.
Who do you blame for that, Aleem?
I blame the Trudeau government for that.
Why?
I blame the Trudeau government because the reason being is because he only wants the Liberals and government to win the next election. I guess he doesn't want to face the criticism of it. But anyhow, that's besides the point. But I think if you want the best ideas, you should be able to have a discussion and a dialogue without someone saying, I'm offended. And this is the big thing that I find with our society is we've canceled comedians, we've canceled people from speaking from conservative viewpoints. And even some liberals as well who are moderate Democrats, for example, as well too, like Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, let the record show we have a wide panoply of views with us here today. Do you have a particular question for any one of these
yes,
five?
Yes, I do. I have one question as well. So the one question I have is that I know our voter turnout is quite low. So my question is that wouldn't it be best to have more incentives, such as, let's say with this, because I know where I grew up in Sarnia, to get more people out for municipal elections, even though their voter turnout was very low. What they would do is they would offer free city bus ride services for people to get to the polling stations without having to pay the fare to go on the bus. Now, my question is that do you think that this should be something that we should implement for all municipal, provincial, and federal elections, because I think this would be a very good idea.
Kinnear, you want in on
Yeah,
that?
no, I 100% agree with that. Actually, with New Majority, we're brainstorming different ways that we can encourage youth voter turnout, and we've taken on so many different mobilization techniques of going up to people on the street, asking them if they have their driver's license on them, if they're ready to vote, and then physically walking them to the polls. We've done things of stopping people on the street if they have voted and encouraging them to text a message, 3 other friends if they can, to get the vote out. And it's not about, voting for one party or another. It's simply voting and expressing your interest in that. And I think free transit is a great way of doing it as well from the accessibility standpoint. So I'm all for encouraging better mobilization efforts of getting people to the polls.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Oh, Wyatt, you want a word?
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think like a lot of local campaigns, like as someone who covers different, political stories frequently, a lot of campaigns that I've kind of shadowed around of all different parties will oftentimes volunteer to take voters to the polls who don't have an option to do so. They'll designate campaign staff to go ahead and do that. That's obviously a question of accessibility, the fact that in order for that to happen, you'd have to reach out to the campaign and ask them for that. But I think there are ways, but obviously expanding on that would be certainly beneficial.
Got it. Yes, please.
Hi, Donovan Lacroixy from Scarborough, Ontario. Proud Scarbarian. I'm just asking you guys, as Generation Z, we do have an election coming up very soon. I'm talking Canadian one. What are some of the issues you still think that the government has not focused on that we haven't talked about today that you'd like the government to focus on?
Jonathan, can I just ask you?
Donovan.
The election you say is coming very soon.
Oh, 2025, isn't it?
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
I wondered whether you knew something the rest of us didn't know. Okay, just checking.
Yes.
Okay, the issues that you want to hear the parties talking about whenever that next election is. Bruce, go.
It's a good one. I was thinking carbon tax, but I think we've all heard enough of the carbon tax in the last couple of months. For me, I think it's important that we're talking about post-secondary affordability, especially with respect to provincially and federally, because the federal government has an important role to play when it comes to housing. I think there needs to be more discussion about tuition rates for students and looking at what's the best way to fund both universities and colleges in Canada and Ontario, and how students are able to find adequate housing.
Cameron, forgive me. Cameron, what do you want to hear?
I think we have to be more like taking an international approach. What are international relations going to be looking like? How we're going to be combating the climate crisis, and how we're going to stay accountable. I want our institutions and our government systems to be accountable. So that's what I want to hear.
Kinnear, what do you want to hear?
Yeah, I keep it to 3: climate change, mental health, and also affordability, especially with the mental health standpoint, since we've heard about affordability and climate. Before the pandemic, it was already bad, and then after the pandemic, it just went from bad to worse. And I think a lot of us in Gen Z, it's very much integrated in our lives. We always know someone that is going through something or that has not been able to seek out those resources to have that change. So hearing politicians speaking about that is very topical for us, and it will impact our future as well.
Sarah?
I think support for Indigenous sovereignty beyond theoretical conversations to support praxis-oriented movements like Land Back. And I also think climate justice and of course, affordability and healthcare for all.
Have you interviewed Justin Trudeau, Wyatt?
I have.
Have you interviewed Doug Ford?
I have.
Okay. Are you about to interview Hillary Clinton?
Next month.
Okay, so you are 3 for 3, and I am 0 for 3 on all of those. I want to be this guy when I grow up. You are doing really well. Presuming you get some of the candidates or some of the leaders in the next election, what do you want to ask them?
Yeah, I think, going back to the previous question too, I think it's affordability, affordability, and affordability. I think right now young people are looking at how they're going to pay for post-secondary, as Bruce had mentioned, how they're going to afford a house, how they're going to pay for groceries, all these different things. And that's not just a Gen Z exclusive issue, because obviously that's impacting all of you who are here today as well, perhaps in some ways in an even more significant way than it is Gen Z. And so I think hearing some solutions on that from all of the different people running, and it's in a number of different ways. Like Justin Trudeau's been the Prime Minister now for basically 10 years. He's had a lot of opportunity to drive home change on that. Some people would say he's been unable to do that. Pierre Poilievre, he's been part of a previous government, and they didn't enact as much change as some people would have liked to see on affordability as well. And so just why should we give them kind of a chance to serve when in many ways they've already had a chance at kind of that executive opportunity?
This is why I want to be this guy in my next life. You are good, Wyatt. Well done. Okay. Right here, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Dharam, and I live in Mississauga. And first of all, I congratulate you all for doing the social impact and community work. And I wish you all the best in the future and more success in whatever you have started. I have a two-part question. First of all, the first question is, what are the values you think are lacking in the current politicians? And what are the new values that Gen Z brings which can change and impact the society?
Nice question. Okay, Kinnear, get us started.
Yeah, sure. So for that second part about the values that we hope to see, I think better open-mindedness and open discussion. All of us are very open-minded. We've been able to hold discussions with each other, and I think in current politics, I'm mainly speaking of the recent debate that we've seen in the US, but we see how polarizing it can be, how people talk over one another, and how it's not really a democracy if it's more of just two personalities fighting against each other. So I think we hope to see those values as well.
Cameron, what values are missing?
I said it already. Come on, say it in the crowd. I want to hear you guys. What did I say? Accountability. We need accountability. I think it's crucial to look at like the past, look at our history. What have we done wrong, right? And then amend it. If we understand our past, we can make a better future. And by making that better future, we can grow, we can thrive, we can do everything that we want to do. But it really just takes accountability and understanding of our history.
Gotcha. Okay, can we get the next question? Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me? My name is Zahir Darcy. You pronounce Z as Z instead of Z or Z. Okay.
Thank you, Zahir.
The seminar reminds me of a TV program I used to watch where I'm originally from, and we'll come back to that. I'll test people to guess where I'm originally from. There was a program called Slattery's People years ago in the 60s where the program opened with a quote. I still remember that quote. Democracy is a very bad form of government, but I ask you never to forget all the others are so much worse. So that capsulizes what democracy means. Now, having lived in Canada, I'm as old as the city of Mississauga, 50 years now, okay? And I'm always grateful to be here in a politically stable country and a democratic country. Because if you have come from places of the world where there's no democracy or where there's dictatorship, you will appreciate Canada better.
Are you from one of those countries?
Yes, I'll come to that.
You're going to give me a hint as to which one?
I'll give you that. Just let me finish. So if you come from such countries, you understand Canada's democratic process much better. So that's my point. Okay, as to where I'm from, okay. Do you remember President Obama? Champion of democracy?
I think we all remember President Obama.
Where
yes.
was his father from?
Kenya, yes.
And Her Majesty the Queen. Where did she get the most important news of her life? Her dad, her father, the king had passed away, and she was now queen of the empire? Kenya. Treetops. You all must have heard of the story.
Is that where you're from?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now, my question for the panel, what are your thoughts on global democracy? Okay, democracy around the world. We see all these problems, these fights going on. An example I can give you is Hong Kong. Okay, former British colony, decolonized, went to China, two-state system, whatever they have, and they still want to be democratic, and yet they can't, for whatever reason. Okay, the riots we had in Bangladesh recently, when the Gen Z there rioted.
So help me with a question here. What do we think of global democracy?
Yes, what are their thoughts on global democracy?
Okay.
As the panel, they're the young people.
Yeah, no, happy to take a question here. First off, I just want to thank you for your quote there. I actually used that, I think, same quote when I made a speech to the Board of Trustees once. So absolutely resonates with me the fact that democracy is, probably the worst form of government, but also the best one there is compared to everything else. I think Canada has a very important role to play in maybe not enforcing global democracy, but promoting global democracy. It's important that the leaders that we're working with are legitimately elected. When you think about Venezuela, when you think about some other countries who are currently going through political turmoil, it's absolutely integral that Canada is dealing with world leaders that are democratically elected. So I think there is absolutely an important role for us to play there.
So we do have a role to play in global democracy.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
We do have a role.
I think we absolutely have a role
as
to play.
Canadians to impart democracy around the world.
Let me anybody else want in on that, or can we go somewhere else?
I think we're ready for the next one.
Okay, we're ready for that.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Zahir.
No problem.
Yes, ma'am, your turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pooja Variawa, and it's a pleasure to be here and to hear about all that you have to say about democracy.
Where are you coming to us from, Pooja?
I actually am coming from Mississauga,
Okay.
and my question is related to, so one of the key challenges is solving political problems that we face. So if you look at the non-Gen Z, some of the challenges that they face are different than Gen Z. How do you think, or no, what are some solutions that we can resolve this polarization to actually focus on solving the problems and moving forward?
Why?
Yeah, I would just say, like, for example, recently I was doing a TV segment, and there was a bunch of people who were on the segment, and I think people have gotten so used to kind of the drama-based kind of back and forth, talking points-based cable news segments, and so this particular segment that I was doing was grounded strictly in policy, and it was actually very refreshing to hear kind of a 30-minute discussion that was grounded in solutions, as you were mentioning. And so I think Gen Z in particular, they're very interested in that. They're very interested in actually hearing solutions as opposed to the talking points that you often hear. And I think that, you know, goes for a number of different issues. And I think Bruce brought it up earlier as it relates to post-secondary. That's just one example. Like, young people, for example, are very much wondering how they're going to be able to afford not just that, but other components of kind of their daily life. And they're wondering, how are these solutions actually going to be presented to them? Because as of right now, it doesn't seem as if that's really front of mind or top of mind for many of the elected officials representing them.
Anybody else want in on this? We're moving on. Thank you, Pooja, for that question. Oh, I love this T-shirt. You dressed for the occasion.
Came ready. I came ready for democracy. Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm from East Toronto. And I want to drill down on the specifics of getting young people to vote. There are 3 provincial elections in this country in October, not in Ontario, as far as we know. BC is testing Saturday, Election Day. So I'm curious what the panel thinks about weekends and youth. Is it easier for youth to vote on the weekend, or is it harder because that's when you're working? Or weekend voting's a good idea?
Interesting. We never have weekend voting in this country, ever. Should we?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I do a lot of reporting for an Australian outlet, and one time I was talking to one of the anchors who works there about the concept of voting, and he was telling me how Australia votes on Saturdays, and he thought it was just such a foreign concept that we in Canada didn't do it. But then he proceeded to tell me about their voter turnout numbers, which were significantly higher than they are here in Canada. I think it's Australia that also has, you know, it's mandatory that you have to vote there. But it's just very interesting, the fact that there's other countries, a large portion of countries, who are exploring this kind of idea, and Canada, for whatever reason, has been kind of closed-minded to it, but and as a result, Canada has, you know, one of the lower voter turnout rates out of anywhere in the world.
I think they have 98% turnout in Australia for elections, because you get effectively you get a ticket if you don't vote. There's a fine, so people vote.
I believe they also introduced mandatory voting and saw how that played out. But it's good to hear that other democracies are able to really reach those voter turnout numbers. As it comes to Saturday elections, I think it definitely would be a step in the right direction in terms of just having people be more available to vote. That being said, with the recent Mississauga by-election, for example, the election day happened on a PA day, so most students were out of school and but we were still able to have only a 25% voter turnout. So it's definitely not the only thing that's stopping us, and we really need to address all causes that lead to that low voter turnout.
Is it a piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, definitely.
It's a piece of the puzzle. Good. Go ahead, sir. You're going to wrap it up for us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to all the panelists for their really insightful conversation. My name is Alexi. I'm from Toronto. Now, even when recognizing Steve's statistics that he started us off with, there is very seriously a not insignificant portion of the population, both in Canada and around the world, who doesn't believe in democracy, the values and the principles and the lived experience of it. What is the way to respond to that? How do we persuade people that democracy is worth it?
Great question. We should say you are working to try to get the voting age lowered to 16, right?
That's right. We have several campaigns municipally across the country, including in Toronto, Halton Hills, West Vancouver, Surrey. There's a campaign in Northwest Territories right now. We're all over the country.
And is it because you want Wyatt to be able to vote as soon as possible?
That's the idea.
That is why. Yeah. Okay. Who wants in on this one? Go ahead. Wyatt.
Sure. I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's Winston Churchill who said one time the very famous quote about how messy democracy actually is. But I think if you just look, as it was mentioned earlier, like Venezuela, a bunch of different countries where democracy actually isn't working or where they don't have democracy to begin with. And so I think if you're looking at a country like Canada, for example, just indicating to people how successful democracy actually can be in terms of driving home some of the solutions to some of the issues that we're facing, and comparing and kind of contrasting that to countries who have been unable to, find solutions to some of the issues that we're dealing with.
Sarah, you want to come in on that?
Right, I think a system that represents its people, a democracy of the people, is something that most people would be in favor of, to feel represented, to have their issues addressed. I think that that's ultimately what people across the world want. And so, having a system that does that, and really doing it in a way that's productive and aligned with, what the people are asking for, would push people to recognize, the good in democracy as a whole.
I think the quote, you folks can help me with the quote here, but I think the quote is, democracy is the worst form of government ever, except for all of the others that have been tried from time to time over the years. Something like that. Anyways, friends, that's our time. We need to say some thank yous before we pull the plug here tonight. First of all, to this wonderful audience who has come here and given of their time in order to participate. Well done. I want to thank our wonderful crew here at the library for setting this up and making it all look so wonderful. I want to thank Hillary Clark. We're going to save all our applause to the end. We're going to thank Hillary Clark, who is the producer of this program and who did her usual excellent job. Thank you very much, Hillary. To the staff here at this beautiful, newly renovated Hazel McCallion Central Library in Mississauga. It wouldn't have happened without all of your efforts. So Laura Reed, Robert Simeon, you guys are top shelf. Thank you. As always, to the Wilson Foundation and its benefactor, Red Wilson. His generosity allows us to host these events for no admission fee for those who want to come. We're really grateful, Red Wilson, that you underwrite our efforts to put democracy on the public's radar screen. We know how important that is to you. For more on this series, you can go to tvo.org/TVO Today Live, or on our YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/@TVO Today. You can see all of the shows all the way back from Bob Woodward, who was our first ever guest, to this one here today. And finally, I know all of you in this room want to join me in thanking our 5 fantastic guests for being here at the library tonight. Now you can applaud. That's great. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks so much for joining us, and good night from Mississauga, Ontario.
TVO Today Live is made possible by the generous support of the Wilson Foundation.